he knows who Nancy Guthrie's kidnappers are and can lead the FBI to those kidnappers for 1 Bitcoin.
On June 26th, 3 days after Savannah Guthrie wept on national television, the anonymous emailer sent his most detailed message yet. And what it contains is not a cry for help, not a desperate bluff, but something far more calculated and far more disturbing. He says he has a phone. He says it is hidden somewhere secure. He says it contains a short video of the main guy with Nancy on what was, in his words, probably her last day alive. He is not asking investigators to find it. He is not offering to hand it over. He is offering to tell someone where it is for exactly 1 Bitcoin, the same price he named on the second day of this investigation, when Nancy Guthrie had been missing for less than 48 hours, and he already knew time was no longer of the essence. Sit with that phrase for a moment. Time is no longer of the essence. That was the sentence in his second email, sent 1 day after his first, in which he had said the opposite. 1 day earlier, urgency existed. 1 day later, it was gone. Not because the situation had resolved, not because Nancy had been found, because whatever that urgency was protecting, whoever it was protecting, was no longer there to protect. That sentence, buried in the early days of a case that would eventually be reclassified as a homicide, may be the most chilling thing any anonymous source has put in writing in this entire investigation. And the person who wrote it has now been writing to TMZ for 5 months. This is not a tipster who sent one email and disappeared. This is not someone who reached out in the chaos of a breaking story and went quiet when the cameras moved on. This is a person who has maintained consistent contact with a celebrity news organization across more than a dozen separate communications, using the same Bitcoin address, the same alias, and the same core claim that he knows who took Nancy Guthrie, that there were 2 of them, that Mexico is part of this story, and that his information is worth exactly 1 Bitcoin to whoever wants it badly enough to pay. TMZ's Harvey Levin, who has spent decades separating genuine knowledge from motivated fiction in high-profile cases, has said publicly that something about these emails convinced him early on that this person was not simply making things up. That is a professional judgment from someone who receives thousands of tips on cases like this. It is not proof, but it is not nothing either. What makes the behavioral profile of this emailer so difficult to dismiss is precisely what makes it so difficult to trust. Every detail he has offered is specific enough to sound credible, but unverifiable enough to protect him completely. He said 2 kidnappers. He said Mexico. He said he is not the anonymous caller who reported the burial site. He called that person an idiot, which means he knows enough about the parallel tip to differentiate himself from it. He said he feared retribution from the people whose identities he claimed to know. He said he was worried investigators might try to implicate him in the kidnapping itself. That last detail is worth pausing on because innocent bystanders do not typically volunteer their fear of being accused as participants. That is the language of someone who understands that their proximity to this information looks suspicious, because it is suspicious, because no ordinary person ends up knowing what this person claims to know about a kidnapping they were not part of. And yet, he has not taken the reward. That is the detail that reshapes everything else when you hold it up to the light. The reward in the Nancy Guthrie case now exceeds $1.2 million. His asking price is 1 Bitcoin, currently worth approximately $65,000. The math does not add up for a fraudster. A sophisticated hoax artist who has been building a believable fiction for 5 months and watching the reward climb would eventually pivot toward the easier money. This person has not. The price has not changed. The Bitcoin address has not changed. What has changed is the claims themselves, each one more specific than the last, moving from general knowledge in February to a named phone in a named secure location in June, a trajectory that, as former detective Chris McDana noted, fits the behavioral pattern of someone who actually has something rather than someone who is running out of room to fabricate. But here is where the story gets genuinely complicated and where honest analysis has to hold 2 things at once. The June 26 26th email describes a video of the main guy with Nancy on the day that was probably her last. That word, probably, is doing enormous work in that sentence. He did not write certainly. He did not write definitively. He wrote probably, which means he is reasoning from information he received, not from something he witnessed. He knows what he was told. He is not certain that the day described to him was actually the last day she was alive. That qualifier is the kind of thing a fabricator would be unlikely to include because it weakens the claim. It is also the kind of thing someone tells you when they are describing second-hand knowledge accurately rather than first-hand experience. It is a small word that carries the weight of an entire theory about who this person actually is. If this emailer is real, and the behavioral evidence suggests he is at minimum someone with genuine proximity to information rather than a pure hoaxer, then what he is describing is a phone sitting somewhere accessible right now, containing a video, photographs, names, addresses, and ages of the people responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie. That evidence, if it exists, would be the most significant break in this case in 5 months. And it is sitting in a secure location, waiting for 1 Bitcoin, while the investigation moves forward without it, and while the window for that information to matter slowly closes. If you want to understand why that dynamic matters, and what the behavioral profile of the man holding it actually tells us about where this case is heading, stay with me, because this is where it gets serious. There is a pattern in how this emailer operates that a trained investigator would recognize immediately, and it is not the pattern of someone who is panicking. Panic produces inconsistency. Panic produces contradictions. Panic produces the kind of escalating desperation that eventually collapses under its own weight. What this emailer has produced instead, across 5 months and more than a dozen communications, is something that looks far more like patience. Deliberate, calculated, unsettling patience. He has been sitting on what he claims is the most important evidence in a 145-day homicide investigation, and he has not flinched. He has not lowered his price. He has not raised it either. He has simply continued writing, continued claiming, continued waiting for someone to decide that 1 Bitcoin is worth what he says it is worth. That kind of stillness, in the context of a case this emotionally charged and this publicly visible, is itself a form of communication. It tells you something about the person behind the emails that the content of those emails alone cannot. Former Detective Chris McDana, speaking on Jesse Weber Live, laid out the 3 things investigators watch for when evaluating tipsters and informants who maintain extended contact in violent and complex kidnapping cases. The first is consistency of verifiable details. The Bitcoin address should match across communications. The alias should match. The core claims about the architecture of the crime should not contradict each other over time. The TMZ emailer passes this test without difficulty. His address matches. His alias matches. His claim of 2 kidnappers has been present since the earliest emails and has never wavered. In 5 months of contact, he has not introduced a 3rd kidnapper. He has not suddenly placed Nancy somewhere other than Mexico. He has not changed the fundamental structure of what he says happened. That level of internal consistency over that length of time is not impossible to fake, but it requires a discipline that most fraudulent tipsters simply do not sustain. The second thing investigators watch for is specificity that cannot be derived from public information. Anyone following this case through mainstream coverage could claim knowledge of the general facts, but specific details, the exact number of kidnappers, the precise geographic connection to Mexico, the existence of a particular format of video evidence, those require either genuine knowledge or an extraordinary and sustained fabrication. The emailer has provided all 3, and he provided them early, before much of what he described had entered the public record. That timing matters more than people realize. It is easy to claim knowledge of something after it becomes public. It is much harder to explain how someone knew it before. The third thing investigators watch for is behavioral escalation under pressure. Someone who is fabricating typically follows one of two paths. They either stop when they are not believed because the effort stops being worth the return, or they escalate into claims that become increasingly implausible, overreaching in ways that eventually expose the fiction. Someone who actually has knowledge tends to follow a different path. They become more specific as they realize that vague claims are not producing results. They sharpen their offer. They narrow the evidence they describe until it becomes concrete enough to be taken seriously. The TMZ emailer's escalation follows this second pattern precisely. The February emails described general knowledge, kidnappers, Mexico, a broad timeline. The June 26th email describes a specific phone, a specific video format, specific categories of evidence, names, addresses, ages, and a specific location that is, in his words, easy to access if you know where it is. The direction of travel is towards specificity, not away from it. That does not confirm authenticity, but it fits the behavioral profile of someone who has something real far better than it fits the profile of someone who does not. Now consider the routing decision this emailer made from the very beginning, because it reveals something about how he thinks and possibly about who taught him to think that way. He did not contact law enforcement. He did not contact the Guthrie family directly. He did not reach out to a lawyer or an intermediary who could have brokered a deal with some protection for him. He went to TMZ, specifically to the outlet that had already received the original ransom note from the actual abductors and was publicly engaged with the case at the highest level. That routing choice, media rather than law enforcement, and specifically the same media outlet that had already been used as a conduit in this investigation, is not random. The original ransom note sent by the kidnappers through media rather than directly to the family was flagged by investigators as an unusual operational decision, one that suggested someone who understood how media pressure amplifies negotiating leverage in ways that direct family contact does not. The emailer made the same calculation. He understood, as the kidnappers apparently understood, that TMZ was the pressure point. That parallel does not prove connection, but it suggests that the emailer either arrived at the same operational logic independently or learned it from someone who had already applied it. Think about what that means. If he learned it from someone inside the operation, then his claim to know the kidnappers is not just plausible. It is the most logical explanation for why he chose the same communications channel they did. And if he arrived at that logic independently, then you are dealing with someone sophisticated enough to analyze the operational structure of an ongoing kidnapping investigation and mirror it deliberately. Neither possibility describes an ordinary person who stumbled across information by accident. What we know about the June 26th email specifically is that it arrived at a precise moment in the public timeline of this case. The case was reclassified as a homicide on June 9th. The contents of the ransom note became public on June 22nd. Savannah Guthrie cried on national television on June 23rd, and 3 days later, the emailer sent his most detailed and most specific message in 5 months of contact. If you believe in coincidence, the timing is nothing. If you believe in behavioral analysis, the timing is everything, because what it suggests is that the emailer watched the note story break publicly and understood something fundamental had shifted. That the investigation had moved to a place where the information he is holding has a narrowing window of relevance. That the case is approaching its conclusion with or without him. And that if he is going to be the person who delivers it on a silver platter, he needs to move soon. Drop your theory in the comments right now, because this case has too many threads running in parallel for any one person to see all of them clearly, and the audience following this story closely has caught details that even experienced investigators have missed. What does the timing of that June 26th email tell you? Was it pressure, or was it something else? Harvey Levin did not ignore the June 26th email. That matters more than it might seem on the surface, because Harvey Levin ignores things constantly. TMZ receives an avalanche of tips, claims, and fabrications on every high-profile case it covers, and the overwhelming majority of them disappear without acknowledgement, without response, and without a second thought from anyone in that newsroom. The ones that get ignored are not always the ones that deserve to be ignored. Sometimes credible information arrives in a form that cannot be verified and gets buried under the volume. But the ones that get a public response, the ones that prompt a veteran journalist with decades of experience to go on camera and issue a direct challenge to an anonymous source, those are different. Those are the ones where something in the pattern has crossed a threshold that experience recognizes even when evidence cannot yet confirm it. Levin went on camera. He described the situation as a cat and mouse game. He issued a public challenge to the emailer, asking him to go to wherever that phone is, retrieve a single screen grab of Nancy, and send it as proof that he is not a fraudster. That is not how a seasoned journalist responds to an obvious hoax. You do not publicly challenge hoaxes to produce evidence. You do not describe them as cat and mouse. You simply move on. The fact that Levin did not move on is itself a data point that belongs in any honest analysis of where this case currently stands. And yet the screen grab has not arrived. As of this reporting, the emailer has not sent the one piece of evidence that would transform his 5 months of claims into something that law enforcement and the public could not dismiss. TMZ asked for it directly and publicly. The FBI has received every email this person has sent, forwarded by TMZ as a matter of standard practice throughout this investigation. The reward sits at more than $1.2 million unclaimed. And the phone, if it exists, sits in its secure location, waiting. That silence has a limited shelf life, and the emailer almost certainly knows it. 5 months of patience built on a foundation of unverifiable claims can only hold its value for so long before the investigation either closes around the people he claims to know or moves so far past the window where his information matters that one Bitcoin becomes an asking price for something no one needs anymore. He knows the math. The question is whether what he is holding is real enough to make him move before that window closes entirely, or whether the silence itself is the answer that everyone involved has been waiting for without quite admitting it. Here is what the FBI's own assessment of this emailer reveals, not about the case, but about the emailer himself. TMZ reported that a previous analysis of the emails led the Bureau to believe the writer might be a woman. That assessment, based on linguistic and behavioral analysis of the communications, was reported publicly. The emailer read that report, and then he responded to it. He pushed back on the gender characterization explicitly and with what can only be described as contempt. He scoffed at it. He was bothered by it in a way that went beyond simple correction. He went out of his way to address it, dismiss it, and make clear that whoever had made that assessment had gotten him wrong in a way he found personally offensive. Stay with me here, because this detail is more revealing than almost anything else in the public record of his communications. A person who is purely motivated by money does not care how investigators profile them. They care about the Bitcoin. They care about the transaction. The characterization of their gender, their psychology, their emotional profile, none of that affects the exchange rate. And yet this emailer, upon reading that the FBI thought he might be a woman, felt compelled to respond. Not to provide evidence, not to move the negotiation forward, but to correct the record about who he is. That emotional need, to be seen accurately, to be taken seriously, to be understood as someone who actually knows what they claim to know, is one of the most consistent threads running through every communication this person has sent. Each email is simultaneously a demand and a bid for recognition. He wants the Bitcoin, yes, but he also wants to be believed. He wants TMZ to understand that he is not a fraud, not a desperate opportunist, not a woman misread by a behavioral algorithm. He wants credit for what he knows and what he has been willing to sit on for 145 days without breaking. That emotional investment is information. It tells you that this person has a relationship relationship with this case that goes beyond financial opportunism. It tells you that whatever proximity brought him into contact with the people or the information he claims to possess, it left a mark on him that simple payment would not erase. He has been carrying this for 5 months. He has been watching the coverage. He has been reading the reports about himself. He has been responding when the characterization stings. That is not the behavior of someone running a detached long-game fraud. That is the behavior of someone who is in this in a way they may not fully have anticipated when they sent the first email the day after Nancy Guthrie disappeared. If this video has given you something to think about, share it with someone who has been following this case. This story deserves more eyes on it, more people asking the right questions, more pressure on the details that have not yet been fully explained. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next development breaks, because in a case moving this fast, the next update could come at any moment, and it could change everything we think we currently understand. What remains now is the question that sits underneath all of the behavioral analysis, all of the linguistic profiling, all of the careful reading of 5 months of anonymous emails. The question is not whether this person has something. The question is what happens when the window finally closes. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell appeared on the Megyn Kelly show and said she is 75% confident the masked suspect from the doorbell footage will eventually be identified and tracked down. TMZ's own law enforcement sources pushed back on that figure, calling it overblown. But the disagreement itself is evidence that the investigation is in motion in ways the public record does not fully capture. People who are close to the truth are disagreeing about how close they actually are, and somewhere in the space between O'Connell's confidence and the pushback against it, the emailer's phone sits in its secure location, holding whatever it holds, waiting for a transaction that may never come. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. The case was reclassified as a homicide on June 9th. The reward is more than $1.2 million, and it has been unclaimed for 145 days. A person who claims to have evidence that would hand investigators everything they need has been writing to a celebrity news organization for 5 months and has not produced a single verifiable piece of proof. And the case is moving toward its conclusion with or without him. If you have any information about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department can be reached at 520-3514900. Justice has not yet been served. The story is not over. And the most important question in this entire case may still be sitting on a phone in a location that only one person knows, waiting for someone to decide it is finally worth the price of finding out. Comment below with what you believe is really happening here. Share this video if you think this case deserves the attention it is not getting. And stay close, because this is far from finished.